and warm welcome. Thank you for joining. It looks like we still have a few more joining us, but it's a wonderful group that is already here. So thank you so much. I think we're going to be able to start. So my name is Frances Davies, and I'm working with the Knowledge Hub for Organic Agriculture in Southern Africa. And the KHSA is part of a continental-wide project called the Knowledge Centre for Organic Agriculture in Africa. And this is an amazing initiative supported by GIZ in Germany. And we are a network of organizations and partners working across Africa in 5 different hubs. And we are obviously from the Southern African region, and there are partners working in Zambia and Malawi and Namibia and South Africa, but of course, part of a much bigger community of practice, all supporting and working towards the vision of a more ecologically sound, safe, and beautiful future for us all. So thank you so much for joining. And this is a part of a series of webinars that we're hosting, or looking at sustainable practices. So what are really the practicalities that farmers need to consider, and what are the things that we can support each other on when it comes to organic agriculture, agroecology? What are some of these really practical tips that we can share? Which is really, really important. There's a lot of amazing advocacy going on around the transition to sustainable food systems, but what does that look like on the ground for farmers? So we have looked at seed systems, we've looked at soil fertility, and today we're looking at pest and disease management, which is critical, but of course is founded on really, really good soil health and plant health, I think we'll talk about today as well. So we're really excited to be here, and also really excited to have both of our amazing speakers. So I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then we're going to start with our first presenter and have a short Q&A after her, and then move into the second presentation and then have some more questions. So huge welcome to Janet Morrow and Rhett Harrison. So Janet is from an incredible organization, Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania. And Janet is the co-founder and also the CEO of SAT, that works at a national level in Tanzania, and really with the goal of supporting smallholder farmers to firstly feed their own families to produce enough food at a household level, really critical, as well as then earn an income to be able to sell good produce, feed their communities, and earn a living wage. So SAT has won the Lash Spring Prize and a number of amazing awards, and is very well known. So thank you so much, Janet, for being with us today. Professor Rhett Harrison is also with us, and we're really excited. I know some of Professor Rhett's work. He's presented to us before, really based on sound research, not only in Zambia, but across the region. And so Rhett is based in Zambia, where I am also. So Rhett has had 25 years experience working across the world, actually, on topics ranging from tropical forest ecology, plant-insect interactions, landscape management, and agroecology. So since the arrival of fall armyworm in Africa, he has been leading a project to develop low-cost smallholder-orientated solutions to managing this pest. And it's quite a focused discussion on particularly fall armyworm, but we really thought that it needed to be included in the series as it is an ongoing problem. So thank you so much, Rhett, for joining us from ICRAF. So thank you. Without further ado, we're going to go into our first presentation. Just do remember, please introduce yourself in the chat box. But if you have any questions for our panelists, our speakers, then put them in the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll be able to answer those and collect them to share them with our presenters after their discussion. So thank you so much, and I'm going to hand straight over to Janet. Hi, Janet, are you able to turn your video on for a moment if possible? Thanks, Janet.
Yes, hello, Francis. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. So warm welcome, and you can share your screen.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to share in today's webinar. As I've been introduced, my name is Janet Maro, and I work with Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania. We are based in the Morogoro region in Tanzania, and I'm co-founder and chief executive officer responsible for programs in the organization. Um, so congratulations also to the Knowledge Hub Southern Africa for organizing this round of webinars. They're quite useful, and I like the practical focus of the webinars. So to the topic today, maybe first I say a bit about SAT. We started work in 2009, and we work with a network of over 27,000 farmers here in Tanzania. We also run a training center where we receive people from other parts of the country, but also from outside the borders of Tanzania. So if any of you wants to come and see, share, exchange, and experience, you're warmly welcome. We have facilities and we have a range of different courses as well that we offer in the subject matter of agroecology and organic agriculture. And our vision is that the majority of farmers are using acknowledged agroecological methods to improve their livelihoods, conserve the environment, and reduce pressure on natural resources. So this vision is driving us. It's our driving force that we get more and more people involved and more people using agroecological methods and helping to produce healthy, nutritious food and not compromising natural resources and not doing harm to the environment. We have the 4 pillars of SAT, which are dissemination of knowledge through our various platforms. I mentioned the Farmer Training Center. We also are co-publisher of a farmer magazine that is distributed in Kiswahili language all over Tanzania. And also we train farmers practically in the groups in the field. Yes,
Just
Francis.
remember to speak slowly, Janet, especially people of different languages from Africa all over. So just speak slowly. You've got time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, so with dissemination here, we are able to share information to different audiences in the field, in the different villages where we work, but also like, for example, at the moment, this is also an opportunity to disseminate knowledge and information on agroecology, especially on the subject matter of pest and disease management. We also have the pillar of application and marketing. And here we work across the whole value chain. So we have the production and the production of healthy and nutritious food, but also we do market linkages for farmers. We also do marketing of the products ourselves. We also do processing, value addition, and packaging of the products. And also we know that it's important for consumers to be aware. So we raise awareness for consumers so they're able to demand and consume the products. Also, we have the pillar of research, and here we collaborate with farmers. Our research approach is, we say, farmer-centered research approach, because farmers are the center of the research problem, but also the efforts to find a possible solution. And in this way, the findings of research are done jointly by farmers, and also the ownership of the research process is by the farmers. And so research solutions are practical and on the ground. And our other pillar is networking, where we collaborate and work with other organizations in Tanzania, but also beyond Tanzania. Now, we believe at SAT that to be able to have healthy crops, you need to have, we say, to have healthy, nutritious crops. And here I mean crops that are not attacked by insects or are free from disease. And we need to have a good balance at the farm level, and a good balance in the ecosystem starts really on the ground, on the soil. So soil health is vital for ensuring that the crops that are growing on the land are healthy and disease free. And Yeah. Yes, and it's the first, maybe this picture, this is one of our systems at the farm. And on this picture, you see we have lines of Gliricidia sepium. This is an agroforestry system with lines of Gliricidia sepium. And we have lines of maize that are planted in the field. And in this way, it helps a lot to make sure that the plants have the vital nutrition they need, but also the plants are protected. I remember when we had a series of pest outbreak, you find that the maize in this system was not heavily attacked by pests, even without use of botanical extracts and spraying on this field, because of the good combination of plants that are in the field. And such intercropping systems, this is an agroforestry system, but we have also the intercropping systems, for example, where you have a system with maize with push-pull, where you have napier grass and a desmodium planted together. And napier grass helps to attract, it attracts the stem borer. And once the stem borer is in the napier grass, then the larva is closed in and it's not able to continue growing. So it helps to reduce the population of stem borers. And the desmodium, which is the legume planted in between the maize rows, helps to do biological nitrogen fixation for the soil, but also it helps to suppress the striga weed seed from growing. So in the end, you have really healthy maize growing, and you can use the residues from the maize crop, but also most important is the napier grass, which you can use, and also desmodium to feed livestock, and they provide multiple benefits in the farm and in the whole integrated system. And in this picture, this is Artemisia, but you see the orange things on the side. These are marigold plants, and the marigold flower, the scientific name is Tegetes minuta, is very effective for controlling soil-borne diseases in plants. I hope I have a better picture, a better close-up, so you can really see the marigold plant. And it helps a lot in fighting soil-borne diseases. And for areas where there are issues, for example, of root knot nematodes, marigold does very well to make sure that the plant is really the soil is clean and disease-free, and it really keeps away the root knot nematodes. So we plant a lot of marigold on the farm, and it does wonders. So we don't have issues of root knot nematode on our tomatoes and solanum species at the farm, due to the use of marigold flowers. And also the leaf extract of marigold is very effective. And so you can make leaf extract from marigold, and having it intercropped with other plants, due to the strong, we say the strong smell of the marigold leaf, it helps to keep away, to repel some harmful pests from the crops. So it has really multiple purposes, from working on the soil, keeping away soil-borne diseases, to repelling insects above ground when it is growing. And it's a very useful plant. And I mentioned about the importance of having good soil health and soil structure, which helps to have good water holding capacity and making sure that the essential nutrients are available for the plants. I tend to say that a healthy plant is like a healthy body. You know, when your body is healthy and your immune system is strong, you rarely fall sick. But when your immune system is compromised and you don't have the vital nutrients that your body needs, you'll see that your growth will be compromised. And this is very vivid on children who are at a growing age. You'll see without proper nutrition, you get compromised growth and development, physically, but also mentally. And also you easily fall sick. You easily are susceptible to sickness and illness. So it's very important to work on the soil, which is like the mother that provides nutrition or feeding for the plant. And the subject of pest and disease management really starts at the soil. So healthy soil is a very important source and foundation. And we've had a session previously on soil fertility management, or we might be having one coming up, but I further emphasize that, and the session on the subject is even more helpful. And now, when we have crops growing, it's important to scout, to look and inspect the field and see the growth and development of the crops, and to identify if there are any signs of pest or disease attack on the plants. And also, sometimes you have situations where you have new pests and new diseases. For example, today we'll have the session on fall armyworm. But when fall armyworm was first diagnosed, when it was first new. The picture you see here on the side, this was us. We were wondering, what is this? What is this pest? So because of the scouting that we did, so we picked some samples and we're trying to wonder what type of insect was this, and because it was quite new that time. I'm happy that Dr. Professor Harrison will talk about the fall armyworm in the next session. But scouting and visiting your field is very important. A garden or a farm is the friend of the one who owns it. And it's important to scout and detect signs of illness at an early stage and be able to work out possible ways to manage the problem before it gets worse. And not every problem on pests or diseases at the farm will entail maybe having to use botanical extracts or having to use external inputs on the field. So some problem maybe you might be able to detect at a very early age, and the solution will just be as simple as picking up, hand picking. Either you get the eggs at an early stage, or you get the larvae and you're able to get rid of them before they propagate and get into big numbers and start making destruction. So don't plant crops and say, you just let them out for a long time while without really monitoring, scouting, and looking. And here now, pruning is like cleaning of the field, which is also vital. Sometimes it's a practice which you reduce some leaves or branches on a plant which are growing but will not really provide any sound benefit. So they take nutrition, but they don't increase production or productivity of the crop. And so if you do pruning, you can use the pruned leaves as organic matter for making compost, or you can use it as mulch in the field, and it makes the plant grow better without competition, and you get biomass for using to make other inputs for the farm. And on this slide, I have different plants which are very useful. I have some aloe species first, and then I have Lantana camara. Lantana camara, I chose to talk a bit about Lantana camara because Lantana camara is one of those plants which you can get Lantana camara powder, which is very useful and can be stored for a long time, and it's still very effective when stored in a dry form and used in the field, just sprinkling on your farm. I have neem, the neem plant, which is very useful as well. Neem has been used for a long time as a botanical. There are some even commercial botanical products that are neem-based and available in the markets. But here, and for us, for our case, we get the extract directly from the tree. So we have the neem trees, we harvest the leaves, we harvest the seeds, and we use them. And I have this is the Tephrosia, not Tephrosia, this is Tithonia diversifolia, which is a very useful plant as well, and it's very useful and very effective. And so when we have crops, one plant, now I just remembered, one plant which I had wanted to mention as well was the Ricinus communis. The Ricinus communis, that is the castor oil plant, which is very effective against fungal diseases in the field. So because we have so many different types of diseases and ailments that can be in the farm, the Ricinus communis and papaya are very effective for fungal diseases. Lantana camara is very effective and can be stored in powder form, and it's very broad for different types of ailments, or for different types of pests. It keeps them out of the field. And aloe and neem, these are very effective for we say soft-bodied insects, but also the insects with exoskeleton and some of the jumping insects on the farm. And without forgetting the chili, the hot pepper, and the hot pepper with its capsicum as an active ingredient, which is also very, very useful for pest control. Now, I said since our session, and I have only about 20 minutes, this is a preparation of botanical extracts, neem-based botanical extracts. And so we pick the leaves and then we grind them in the mortar. After grinding them, we soak in water. So we take about 2 kilos of neem leaves. We grind them in the mortar and then soak in water for 12 up to 24 hours. And then we dilute with 10 liters of water. We dilute with another 10 liters of water, and we spray on the plants for pest control using neem. And this is a combination which shows a mixture of neem, but also we have hot pepper. And this is soaked for 24 hours. As you can see the color, it's soaked for a bit longer. And this is a very deep concentration. And let me repeat something, that once you have a very healthy soil, the plants that will be growing in this balanced, healthy soil are so healthy that you will be surprised that even they don't really get attacked by pests or don't fall sick with diseases. So really, this is we say it's remedies as last resort for situations where your crops are really attacked with pests or diseases, and you really are going to be protecting them using organic or ecological methods. And yes, I think this is a nice and better picture of the marigold I was talking about. You see these beautiful flowers, and close up. They're available everywhere. I've seen these plants grow everywhere. In every region I go, I find these plants, and they're very easy to grow. From the flower, once it dries off, you get the seeds, and they do wonders. So very good to intercrop in the field. And also, crop diversification on farm is very important. For example, here you see we have the marigold, but also we have, I think this is a chili or pepper, and then we have the spinach or Swiss chard plants as a vegetable. There is also amaranthus. So on one bed, we have really quite a big diversity of different crops. This is another picture showing intercropping with onions. And onions are very good repellents as well for pests in the field. And yes, also another intercropping picture with onions and sweet pepper. Yes, also another picture. And let's not forget the farmers' friends. These are beneficial insects that are good and very good in the system, in the farm. They help to they're predators, and they help to feed on or pick on other insects that will be pests in the farm. For example, the wasp. We have the ladybird beetle, and here on the side, this is the it's the larva of a ladybird beetle, which it's said to be able to feed on at least 3,000 aphids in a day. So this is very, very important and very, very useful. We can only have these beneficial insects surviving in our farms and in our systems if we keep a healthy system, and also if we are not using heavy synthetic chemicals which kill every insect in the farm. And also we should not forget the bees. And since the bees are pollinators and they do pollination of our flowering plants in the farm. And if we are able to keep our natural enemies, to have healthy soil, and be able to manage pests and diseases when they come from time to time, we are able to have healthy and nutritious plants, and this is a very good basis for livelihoods of farmers and communities, but also it's very good for the consumers as they get to eat healthy, nutritious food that is not contaminated with any pests or diseases, but also without any crop residues, without any pesticide residues in the crops. And we are able to ensure the future generations' ability to grow healthy, nutritious crops and not have to worry about diseases that are a result of contamination or collection of harmful chemicals in our systems for a long time. And here on this slide, this picture is Tephrosia vogeli, which for some, it's known to be toxic to fish, but also it should be, it's known to be toxic to fish, and people use it when they do illegal fishing. So we don't use it anymore at SAT due to also some realization, but also some ruling about the toxicity level of the plant. So, but yes, I thought I also mentioned that some plants are can be very toxic, and not every plant can be used as a botanical extract for human, even when some are very effective, like the Tephrosia vogeli plant. Thank you so much, and we'll pause here and welcome if there are any questions.
Jana, thank you so much. That was a really, really excellent presentation. Very, very clear. Thank you. I have learned a lot. So thank you. That was really interesting that you brought in that last bit about Tephrosia. I've heard it spoken so many times. And so that's the whole thing, is what actually, it might be a good thing, but we live in a much bigger system. And so what are some of the other effects of the things that we're doing and what we're using on our field? So thank you for that. We have a few points that have already been put into the chat. I just wanted to just point to what you said was really important, is that pest and disease management, of course, is part of this other, the much bigger, longer term management that we're doing as farmers. And so there's the soil health, there's that long-term management, and then there's also the short-term interventions that needs to happen. And we did the presentation on soil fertility last week that looked at exactly that. What are the strategies that we do to have long-term good soil health? And then what are the amendments that we add when we need to? And I think what you pointed to is, let's manage our systems, and then when we need to, we add something, we do an intervention. And those interventions, might be then the addition, the remedy that you need to add. But it's about those scoutings and about the farmers' friends and companion planting. And you also mentioned push-pull, which would be an interesting thing maybe to talk about a little bit more. So there's been a couple of questions. And so let me just, do you have plans? I think I would just like to start, if you could just speak a little bit, Janet, to the push-pull mechanism and what that means. When you said push-pull, what is that? And then we can add some more questions. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Frances. Push-pull is a system, and it's a farming system. This system was a result of work of the International Center for Insect Physiology and Ecology in Kenya, and Dr. Hans Rudolf Herren. He worked on the system very many years ago, more than 20 years ago. And through this work, he also won he won the World Food Prize. So back in the days, it was very, very useful, very important work. Now the push-pull technology itself, in the push-pull technology, you have napier grass. Napier grass is a plant. Its shape, when the plant is growing, it has a shape almost it has stalks almost like the stalks of maize. So these long long stalks, and so it's very easy to think from a distance that maybe it's a bunch of maize growing together. So you plant the napier grass on the side, also on the row, like you saw in the slide with agroforestry system. Let me use this as an example. This, yeah. So here, for example, you will have a line of napier grass on the side, and the napier grass helps to do the pull. So it pulls, it brings closer, it attracts the stem borers. The stem borer is the larva, the insect that attacks maize, and it will go into the stem and attack the maize plant and make it not be able to grow properly or have good maize. Good maize. So the napier grass will attract this stem borer or stalk borer to go into the napier grass. Once this insect makes its way into the plant, because normally the insect goes inside, it will go into the stalk of the plant. So the moment it goes into the stalk of the plant, the liquid that comes out from inside this plant covers the stem borer, and the stem borer is not able to further grow, and so it dies in the stem of the napier grass.
Okay.
The other plant in the push-pull system is Desmodium. Desmodium is a legume plant, so it does biological nitrogen fixation. Okay. It takes nitrogen from the atmosphere and puts it into the soil through the nodules. Okay. So the Desmodium is planted in between the maize or sorghum plant, just like you will plant beans or any other legume together with your plants. So okay. The Desmodium does the push. So Desmodium first, the stem borers, stalk borers do not like the smell of Desmodium, so they're pushed away. But also the Desmodium does a very important function. There are places where we have issues with striga weed. This is the weed, it's a parasitic weed which grows and attaches itself on the maize plant or sorghum. At the moment the seed germinates, it attaches itself and it's able to grow on the root. So it will be feeding on the plant instead of the plant getting the nutrition. So okay. Once the striga weed has attached itself on the plant, it gets all the nutrition, it grows very well and gives very beautiful flowers. But the plant will not grow well, and you will barely get any harvest. So the striga weed, or also commonly known as witchweed. So there are places for us here in Tanzania, they call it witchweed, because when you have it in the field, you don't get to harvest any maize. You have the field with flowers, with purple flowers, but no maize. So the witchweed, takes all the nutrition and grows, and the plant is not able to grow. So the Desmodium suppresses the striga weed seeds. So the push-pull system now performs very vital, important functions in the system and ensures that plants are able to grow and to grow successfully. And here, they also add the Desmodium, as I said, it adds nutrition as well in the soil. And then you can, of course, harvest and feed the animals from the napier grass. It provides very good feed for cattle, for livestock. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there are multiple benefits then that can come from that push-pull system for the fodder, for soil health, and then obviously the management of those pests. Thank you, Janet. I think, can you speak to what are some of the diseases and pests that can be controlled by the different plants? So you mentioned the aloe and the gold flowers, which were the marigolds. So can you name some of the main pests and diseases that we're addressing using some of the remedies that you've spoken about?
Yes, I start with marigold. With the marigold flowers, they're very effective against soil-borne diseases. These are diseases that come from the soil, and fungal diseases, and also they're very effective against root knot nematodes. So, this problem whereby the root knot nematodes attach themselves on the on the plant, especially tomatoes, are very susceptible and heavily attacked by root knot nematodes. So the nematode will attack the roots of the tomato, and the roots of the tomato will be swollen. So if you pull up the tomato, you will see that it has very swollen roots. So once it has this problem, the above ground growth and development of the tomato is compromised. The tomato will be stunted, it will start wilting, and it will not grow well. So marigold is very effective against root knot nematodes. And I say this for over 12 years. This has been our remedy in the soils, and we have no issue with root knot nematodes. And for fungal diseases, for example, on tomatoes, especially during the time when you have damp weather, where you have damp weather, and so it makes it very conducive for fungus to multiply and attack places. Huh? So in such situations, and where you have tomato crop in the field, Lantana camara and papaya, Lantana camara and papaya are very effective against fungal diseases on growing crops in the field. So a spray of papaya leaf extract or Lantana, no, sorry, not Lantana camara, it's the castor oil plant. A spray of the castor oil plant or papaya leaves is very effective and protects the plant from fungus, from getting any fungal attack. And on tomatoes, also there is the blight on tomatoes, which is another disease that affects tomatoes when the weather is damp. Is very well protected with the Ricinus communis, the castor plant extract. And then when it comes to insects, to pests such as aphids, also some soft-bodied pests such as these larvas, diamond back moth, for example, these are very easily managed. So for the back moth, for example, or the bollworm, you can handpick if you detect them at a very early stage before they have multiplied. But if they are already there and you are late, you can manage them using neem extracts and chili extracts, especially chili extracts due to the they say capsaicin, the active ingredient in chili, and also the hotness. It irritates the body because these are insects with soft bodies. So the chili irritates them. But the neem extract, neem has azadirachtanin, and azadirachtanin is known to be effective, and it's known to be effective, and it inhibits the supply of oxygen for some of these insects. So it's as I say, it's not very, very nice because it really inhibits the supply of oxygen, and so they really suffocate. It suffocates them, and they don't continue staying in the place. And so also the insects with exoskeletons, these insects which have some shells or some skeleton on the outer surface of the body, also managed by neem extract, because neem has azadirachtanin, as I mentioned, and azadirachtanin inhibits the supply of oxygen in small-bodied and small insects. Yeah. Yes.
That was really interesting. Thank you. And you've spoken a little bit about tomatoes already. And I know that, this is a very popular crop that's grown everywhere and is a cash crop for people. And so growing tomatoes organically is hard because all of our neighbors are spraying a lot of pesticides and herbicides. So it would be really interesting. Someone also asked about the remedy for tuta absoluta on tomatoes. And again, that whole thing about, we might be growing organically, but what are our neighbors doing and the effect of that? And then also just the other question was knowing more about blight, like really what is blight? And I think you've really spoken to some of the answers, but just to say, a little bit more about what that is, and then obviously it'll relate to some of the things that you've already given the remedies on. And maybe if you can point to some recipes that people can, some resources that you could put in the chat afterwards. But first, let's talk about tuta absoluta and the blight.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Tuta absoluta. There was the Lantana camara. I think it should be here. Lantana camara is very effective, and it is very effective against Tuta absoluta. Neem extract as well, but I talk of I talk of Lantana camara due to the possibility that you can really harvest, dry the leaves, store, and also use over long periods of time. But indeed, we have successfully managed Tuta absoluta. In the time, this is some years back when we had the problem with Tuta absoluta, and I must say honestly, our systems are so resilient and so healthy that we don't really have so many pests anymore in the systems. But I remember when we had issues with Tuta absoluta, Lantana camara proved to be very, very effective. And so with regards to recipe and the recipe, I mentioned a bit the recipe for using neem leaf extract, whereby you take 2 kilos of neem, pounded neem leaves and soak in water for 12 up to 24 hours, and then dilute that on a ratio of 1:1 and use in the field. But if you have an infestation, we say then you don't, either you reduce the ratio of dilution or you don't dilute, depending on the level of infestation of the crop in the field.
Okay.
Yes. And castor oil plant is for against fungal diseases, especially those that affect tomatoes. Tomatoes are very susceptible to fungal diseases, and castor oil plant is fantastic. It's really it keeps away the fungal diseases on tomatoes. And I have heard from many farmers, that it's very difficult to grow tomatoes organically. And I understand their concern because, yes, tomatoes are very highly susceptible to diseases, but also to pests. And that's why it's important to know some of the remedies for fungal. It's the castor oil plant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Maybe after this, I can ask you to put that recipe for the neem in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And the lantana, so someone asked about the picture for the lantana, and it's in the bottom left corner there of your picture that you have.
Yeah.
Is that the same lantana that exists, it grows as an invasive plant everywhere, or is this a different lantana?
It's the same.
Okay,
it's the same lantana. Some use it. Some use it also as for ornamental purposes, for the garden, fencing, and all that one. It has very strong, if you pick the leaves, they have a very strong smell, and it gives very beautiful flowers. And the seeds are, they stay a small group of very, very small round seeds together. When they ripen, the seeds normally get dark, very, very dark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to close this part, but I just have two more questions. We didn't talk exactly what blight is. If you could just say what blight. And then one more.
Yes.
Carry on.
Yes. So blight is a disease. It affects tomatoes, and it's a fungal disease that affects tomatoes. Once the plant is affected, the plant will wither. So there's early blight and there's late blight. Early blight has the leaves of the tomatoes also getting some spots. So sometimes you will see brown spots on the tomatoes. And late blight, it affects when the tomato plant is already growing and maybe has given already the fruit. So you will see the fruit like decaying, and not just one fruit. You'll see like a group of fruits decaying and seeming as if they have a lot of water inside and just dying off, the fruit dying off like that. So yes, blight is it's a fungal, not viral or bacterial. I think it's one of the fungal diseases. But there's early blight, and then you have the late blight, which affects the fruit, and that can be protected with the castor oil plant extract. Okay. Yes, and you spray that before you have this damp weather, which brings the fungus and makes the fungus to spread and attack. So it really provides protection against the fungus. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And you had another.
Yeah, last question, just about some of the plants that we're using for push-pull, like the chili and also onions. If you're in the case of a backyard garden, when you don't have a lot of space, is there possibility, for instance, onion, to use chopped raw onions to lay them on the soil, or is it that the plant has to be growing in the soil and more of a companion planting context? Can you share a little bit about using it as an addition rather than as a living plant?
Okay, I think it's for the it's here
and also
for
chili.
onions, for onion usage. So like here, you see the onion is planted inside, and it's this that provides the repellent properties. Using chopped onion in the farm might be effective, but only it will be temporary, because also you cannot keep the freshness of chopped onion for a long time. It's the same as using garlic. We also, from time to time, use garlic as well, but you cannot keep that for a very long period of time. But if you have the onion intercropped in your system, in your backyard, then it's there growing together with your plant. And also intercropping with plants like marigold, also they provide beautification for the backyard. They also attract beneficial insects to come, with these beautiful flowers. And they really keep the soil healthy, but also the plant healthy. So I would recommend intercropping and having getting to enjoy the multiple benefits of intercropped farms. Yeah.
And of course, as you say, the attraction of having such beautiful farms. Yes. It's also about our own health. So those flowers are really wonderful. So Janet, thank you so much. It's been an amazing presentation, and there are so many more questions. So please do, maybe if you could give some of your attention to the Q&A box for now, while we move over to the next presenter. And if there's time at the end, then I'm going to direct some more questions back to you. So thank you so much for an amazing presentation. So I would like to thanks, Janet, to move to our next speaker, Professor Rhett Harrison. And for those who joined late, so Rhett Harrison is from ICRAF, from World Agroforestry as well, and is based in Zambia. There's more than 25 years experience of working across the world, and has been now more recently, since the onset of fall armyworm, been doing a lot of research and work with farmers on dealing with fall armyworm in Africa, and really looking at the responses that our governments and many farmers have had to turn to, and what the effects have been, and actually what are some of the real solutions that we're going to have to be dealing with when it comes to fall armyworm. So I'm really happy to welcome Professor Rhett Harrison. Just checking, are you there, Professor Rhett? I can't see you on my screen. Hi, thank you so much. So over to you. If you could share. Hi, Rhett. Thank you so much. If you could share your screen.
Yeah, sure.
So now we're really zooming in on fall armyworm. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to switch off my video because I have a bit of a unstable connection whilst I'm using my talk.
Thanks. And if you could just try and speak as loudly as possible. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm going to be talking about integrated pest management options for fall armyworm, which, as Francis just explained, is a very specific, narrowed down, but of course, maize, this is a major pest of maize, and maize is a very important crop in the region. And actually, fall armyworm does attack other crops as well. So the fall armyworm arrived here. It's an invasive or a recently arrived pest. So it arrived from the Americas, where it's indigenous, just in 2016. But it spread very quickly across Africa, and then also it reached all the way to Australia within 2 years. So and when it first arrived, there was a big panic because of the amount of damage people perceived that this pest could cause. And this led to a very sort of knee-jerk reaction, which was to start issuing broad spectrum pesticides without necessarily thinking about how these what these pesticides may cause in terms of damage to the environment and human health. Of course, one of the main problems we have is that poorer farmers here don't necessarily use protective clothing or know how to handle toxic chemicals very well. So obviously, integrated pest management is an approach that tries to minimize the use of chemicals and use alternatives such as the ones we've just been hearing. However, the overuse of these broad spectrum pesticides, especially the most toxic ones, threatens to undermine IPM. And this is because the pesticides often have a bigger effect on the natural enemies than they do on the pest itself. And when you use them too much, you end up undermining that ecosystem service that we're getting from our natural enemies. There are a whole bunch of very toxic pesticides being widely used in sub-Saharan Africa. This is, you can see the reference down there to the paper. But essentially what this is a table is with the highly hazardous at the top, on the top row, and then column according to the efficacy. So what we would hope is that people would use low risk pesticides, in other words, the bottom row, that have good to excellent efficacy. And these ones are things like the neem and other plant extracts and the nuclear polyhedrovirus and so on. And these, unfortunately, though, these are rarely the ones that people are actually applying, and especially rarely the ones that governments are supporting when they give them out as subsidized chemicals to farmers. So one of the first things we want to try and advocate for is, please make sure that you're using a pesticide that has a good to excellent efficacy, and ideally with the lowest risk toxicity as possible. And there are plenty of options out there, so there's no real excuse for using more highly hazardous chemicals. This is just a piece of work that was published from the same group as the last paper in West Africa, where they put wristbands on farmers, and then after a couple of weeks in the field, they took the wristbands off them, and these bands are designed to absorb chemicals from the atmosphere. And basically what they found is they found huge numbers of pesticides ingredients affecting the farmers, or at least being detected by the wristbands. They had 70 wristbands, so you can see that delta methrin there at the top, the blue one, was found on 69 out of 70 farmers things. So it really is a massive health hazard that these pesticides are being overused. And it's not just that people are being exposed to a single dangerous chemical. They're in fact being exposed to multiple dangerous chemicals because of this massive overuse of pesticides. So by advocating for pesticide use, we really are causing a potential health hazard in years to come from the toxic effects of these chemicals. So this is the integrated pest management works on the premise of a kind of pyramid, where you have at the bottom of the pyramid, on which everything else works, which was very well introduced from the last talk. you have all these different kind of control methods, which are just there in the field, in the way you manage your field. Things like the way the landscape is managed. Does it have natural forest? Whether you're using interventions such as agroecological controls, such as intercropping, as was introduced. Whether you're using plants with natural resistance to the pest. Mechanical control, such as picking. And then, of course, biological control, which can involve the release of natural enemies. So these are all the kind of bottom row upon which you try to prevent a pest problem ever emerging in the first place. And then above that, you have this activity where you do the monitoring, the scouting, and you understand the threshold. That is, you understand at what level of pest damage do you need to actually make an intervention? Do you need to actually spend some money on some pesticide? Or maybe it's just labor if it's your own biopesticide that you're making. And then the next step up is that you try to use biopesticides. These are, you know, low toxicity, readily available stuff in and around your fields, as again was explained in the last talk, or whether you buy a synthetic pesticide. And really, for fall armyworm, there is no need to proceed to the last step, because the biopesticides that that are available are, you know, very, very effective.
Sorry, Rhett, can you try and speak a bit louder? I think it's your mic, but thank you. Some people are battling.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. I'll try and shout. So we've been conducting a survey across 6 sites in Malawi and Zambia here on the map. And we have, at each site, we have 2 landscapes that we've been working in, one with higher tree cover and one with lower tree cover. So and what we've been doing here is doing experiments on things like intercropping and soil amendment. But in fact, the data I'm going to show you is just the data from our control. So these were plots that we didn't do anything in. We didn't protect the crop against fall armyworm at all. And so across the columns there are each of the landscapes, and they're arranged from low rainfall on the left to high rainfall on the right. And then the rows there are the different surveys we made. So early 2020 to late 2020, early 2021, and late 2021. And on the y-axis there, what we're looking at is the level of damage. Now, this is a scale that goes from 0 to 8, where 0 is no damage and 8 is a very, very badly eaten plant, essentially. But what you'll see there from these charts is that on every survey that we did, the horizontal black line is the median. That's what we found in most situations in most fields. Okay, and on every single one, it's actually below 1. So in other words, the median damage is absolutely trivial from fall armyworm. You get the occasional plant that's damaged a lot, but most of the plants are hardly being damaged at all. And in some landscapes, like in Kawambwa, where you have high rainfall, there's almost no fall armyworm at all. And in fact, even in other landscapes, we're seeing, like, look at Lilongwe. In the first year, we had very little fall armyworm. In the second year, a little bit more. But in none of these cases was the leaf damage caused very significant. And when we try and have a look and to see whether the amount of 4 incidents, that's the number of plants infested with fall armyworm, how that impacts yield, there's absolutely no relationship at all. None of those relationships are significant. So we could not detect a significant impact from fall armyworm. This was in these wild fields where we did no control. We simply planted the plot and then came back and measured the yield, and we scouted the crop at intervals to understand the damage, but we can't detect any impact. Now we also, and this is applies to the damage score as well, the same result, the infestation and damage score producing, we can't detect any impact on yield. And if we look at the number of severely damaged plants, now I define that by the score being over 4. So as I said, it goes from 0 to 8. So a severely damaged plant was any plant that had damage higher than 4. And what we can see here is that there's very, very few fields with 2%, which means that 1 out of 50 plants was severely damaged. We can only find about 15% of fields have one plant or at least one plant that is severely damaged. When we go up to like more than 10% severely damaged plants, we find that it's just maybe, in that first early 2020 survey, only about 4%, 3.8% of fields actually had more than 10% severely damaged plants. So the reality is that most of our plants are not being damaged by this, and very, very few are being severely damaged. So the long and the short of this is, people should not be panicking. Even if they're finding fall armyworm in their fields, which they almost certainly will, they should not panic because most of the plants are not being damaged badly. We did an experiment in the screenhouse just to try and understand the relationship between leaf damage and yield loss. And this is just to show that, because we exposed the plants to fall armyworm larvae for different numbers of weeks. And then we looked at the amount of damage that we measured across different surveys. So this just shows you that the longer we allowed the larvae to eat the leaves, the more damage we recorded. So we got a large variation across our plants in the amount of damage. And what we can see, this is just one of the results that we got, but I wanted to show this. What we can see here is that although there is a relationship between leaf damage and grain yield, so you can see that the line is just slightly dipping down there. So there is a negative relationship. The more leaf damage you have, the lower the yield. It explained almost none of the variation that we got in yield, so less than 8%. And this is in a screenhouse. This is when we've carefully watered with drip watering. We've fertilized every plant exactly the same amount. We've been very, very careful to control all the aspects that would cause variation in yield among plants. And even then, the leaf damage actually explained very, very little. In other words, as a farmer, you're going to achieve much, much more by doing, for example, better soil management in terms of protecting your yields or improving your yields than you are in dealing with this pest. The amount of leaf damage, the amount of yield loss caused by fall armyworm is actually very, very small. So yes, I already introduced this pyramid. So our focus should be on that bottom row of the pyramid. And this is one of the reasons why in our study we've been recording such low levels of damage. You have all of these types of interventions that we can call agroecological intervention. For example, along the boundary there where we have the number 9, we have diverse margins. So we may have flowers in the margin of our field and weeds and other things, but it provides a habitat for natural enemies to live in. We may plant, for example, number 4, we may plant a few shrubs that produce nectar. Nectar is good for bees, but it's also good for many of the parasitoids that are going to attack your pests. You might intercrop with, for example, Gliricidia, or Desmodium, which produces chemicals that the pests don't like, so they tend to lay less eggs on your crop. You may practice some agroforestry. Trees increase the diversity of the farm, and in particular, they increase the structural diversity, which provides lots of habitat for natural enemies to live in, and so on. So there are lots of different ways that you can improve the farm environment so that you improve the effectiveness of the natural enemies. Number 11 there is actually putting out a tube that natural enemies can nest in. But the point is, there are many options, but every farmer doesn't have to do all of them. They just integrate them in the way that is convenient to themselves. In Latin America, where this pest comes from, that in Honduras and Nicaragua, you have smallholder farmers that manage farms quite similar to the ones here in most of sub-Saharan Africa. And there, these farmers don't find that fall armyworm is a major pest. It's there, it's in their fields, but it's not causing a lot of damage. So there's hope that the same type of management can achieve control of fall armyworm here. So the three basic elements of agroecological approaches to pest management. Number one, you've already heard talked about a lot, is the integrated soil fertility management. And this supports healthy plants. The plants are both stronger, but they also produce anti-pest chemicals in their leaves, which persuades the pests to go and feed elsewhere. So good, healthy soils lead to lower pest infestation. Then the next one is that we want to enhance biodiversity at every scale. So within the plot, we might want to try intercropping. Around the plot, we have field margins. That's also the principle that the push-pull works by. You want to try agroforestry because of the extra diversity, structural diversity that trees provide. Within your farm, you want to have different crops, because a sea of one crop is like inviting a pest to lunch. And also, it is very important, lots of papers demonstrate that natural forest within the landscape helps to control pests. So protecting forests from very small scales, just on your own farm, to community forests at the landscape scale, both very important from a pest control point of view. Then the last thing is that you can do specific interventions to try and control natural enemies. So, for example, you might put up these tubes that insects like to nest in, or, for example, to build shelters for bats to nest in. Bats are very avid predators of the adult moths. They can eat hundreds in a night, so they can really control the population of adult moths. So we can do all of these different things. Again, the emphasis being that, you start with healthy plants through managing a very healthy soil, enhance the biodiversity so that you give living space to lots of natural enemies, and then also maybe providing some specific interventions to encourage ones that will help control your pest. Natural enemies are in, provided you're not spraying your fields, you will find natural enemies in all of your fields, and these vary from parasitoids. These are tiny wasps, flies, nematodes that attack the eggs and larvae of the pest. They lay their own eggs in the eggs and larvae, and then they take it over. They breed there and ultimately kill the larva. And then we have a whole suite of predators, from ants to large wasps, assassin bugs, beetles, spiders, earwigs. All of these attack the eggs and young larvae of the fall armyworm, and will put pressure on the population so that it doesn't take off. And then last of all, you have some bats and some birds, which particularly attack the adult moths. Another thing that we can do is to try and use what they call augmentative biological control, which is where we deliberately manage the environment or even release a particular predator or parasitoid to try and increase that service that we're getting. In this case, we're doing a little bit of research on social wasps. These are extremely important predators of fall armyworm. Especially the larger species can actually go down into the well, pull out the fall armyworm larvae, and then they munch it up and they take it back and feed it to their larvae. So they're very important. So we're looking to see whether or not you can't manage these by in the same way that somebody manages bees. So you would put the colonies in boxes and then take the boxes out to the field. But whether we're using social wasps or there's another student here working on assassin bugs, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you have this option of trying to breed or manage in some kind of way a predator or a parasitoid that you can then release to control the pest. And I would, for one, would be saying that this is an area where governments can really intervene. They can encourage research in this. They can also use it they can assist to make it a commercial enterprise so that people can go and buy these predators. And so instead of buying pesticides or supporting the pesticide industry, they can instead support biological control. Monitoring and decision-making is absolutely essential. For fall armyworm, it's absolutely critical that you do scouting. The pheromone traps, you can see a picture of the pheromone trap there. The pheromone traps only indicate the presence of the pest in the area. They're not reliable for making decisions as to whether or not you need to spray or need to make any other intervention. I would also say that the infestation rate, which is the proportion of plants that have fall armyworm larvae on them. So this is when you do your scouting, you actually find a larvae on a plant, you count that as 1. When you don't, 0, and then you calculate your proportion. But actually, the infestation rate is also not very reliable because many of the larvae will be eaten by a natural enemy. So the best indicator is probably the number of severely damaged plants. If a plant is severely damaged, that means that the larvae has survived to one of the late instars, the 5th or the 6th instar. So it managed to escape the natural enemies to reach that age. So that indicates that at least in that particular larvae's case, that it was not controlled. So when you have severely just some damage just indicates that there was larvae on the plant, but it was then eaten. The larvae was then eaten. But severe damage does mean that the larvae has escaped control. So that the proportion of severely damaged plants in your field is probably your best indicator as to whether or not you actually need to make an intervention. If you're just having a whole bunch of plants that are only slightly damaged, it is nothing to worry about. The yield loss will be absolutely trivial. So with that, I'll finish, and I'm ready for some questions. I'm sorry about the sound connection. I'm not quite sure why it's not working, but hopefully you managed to understand something.
Thank you so much, Rhett. That was really, really interesting. And maybe while we answer questions, can I ask you to go back to the pyramid slide you had again? It'll just be quite nice to look at while we're going through some questions. So I think I would like to just start off straight away. I mean, you really presented some very excellent research that showed that, yes, fall armyworm is a problem, but actually some of the poisons that we use are more of a problem. And it is a lot of leaf damage potentially, but not so much about yield damage. And so a lot of people run automatically to poisons, which you've already spoken to. And then often when we talk about pest and disease management, we look at, okay, so these are bad pesticides, these are synthetic pesticides, so let's use organic pesticides. And that's the first option, rather than saying, how do I manage my soil? How do I manage my diversity? How do I get more farmers' friends, the good pests, the good farmers' friends, the good bugs in our field? So I would just like you, there was a question that said, if we no to chemical pesticides, but then we have organic pesticides, how do the organic pesticides differentiate so that they don't kill our beneficial insects? So could you speak a little bit about that and the difference between those pesticides and the effects that they have?
Yeah, sure thing. So the first thing actually to learn is that is not an absolute rule. You do need to study the biopesticide you're using and know its effects. There are biopesticides. There was one example given by the previous speaker where she was talking about Tephrosia. Tephrosia is a highly toxic plant, and it will damage it will kill the natural enemies as well. So it's not an advisable one to use very much. So it really depends on the mode of action of the chemical in the plant. So this is where it gets technical, but there are two main reasons why botanicals tend to be less damaging. The first is that they tend to break down quicker in the environment. So this means that when they're sprayed on the field or applied on the field, they have their effect for a shorter period of time, and then the community in the field is able to recover quicker. The second is that the mode of action of many of them, this applies, for example, to neem oil or neem leaf, is that they are feeding inhibitors. So, or in fact, they just produce a smell that the pest does not like. So then it doesn't affect your field. But a feeding inhibitor just makes the larvae doesn't like to eat very much, so it stops eating as much, and eventually it will starve itself. And they take longer to develop, so they're more likely to be attacked by a natural enemy, and all this kind of thing. And the point about a feeding inhibitor is that because it affects the herbivores, which are the things that are coming to eat your crop, but it doesn't affect all those predators that are then going to attack the herbivores. So yeah, the two answers is, first of all, it's not, you do have to understand your biopesticides to know whether or not they will have an effect. Some are very toxic, so it's not an absolute rule, but they tend to be less toxic because most of them are feeding inhibitors, or for example, with some of the the nuclear polyhedrovirus, it's a very specific virus to that plant. So so some of the botanicals or biologicals are very specific as well. But in every case, it's important to understand how the pesticide works to understand whether or not it's going to be less toxic to your natural enemies.
Thanks, Rit. That was really helpful. There is another one, and I know that it was practiced a lot in the beginning about putting sand on the soil to deal with fall armyworm, as well as using things like washing powder. Farmers have tried a lot of different things. Could you speak to any of your research on some of those other innovations that farmers have used, and what has been their research and experience on that?
Yeah, so most of these are found to be somewhat effective, perhaps not as effective as a pesticide, but they're obviously reasonably effective, and of course they are not toxic or things. So they're a good option, and they're an affordable option to use. Actually, one of the more successful ones was the detergent. Just as I hadn't heard of detergent powder, but a small, making up a concentration of weak detergent and then just dribbling it into the funnel where you have them. Basically what happens is the larvae cannot breathe, and so it drowns inside the funnel. So that has been found to be quite effective, and it doesn't seem to impact, as long as it's a weak solution, it doesn't seem to have any negative effect on the plant. But ash, and if sand is a bit of a mixed one, because if there's too much, it can cause the well to overheat. So you just a little dribble of sand into the well means that the larvae gets the sand on its skin, and then it abrases the skin, so it will eventually kill it. So it also works, but the problem is some people put too much sand into the well, and then the well overheats, and then that kills the plant. So it has to be just a little dribble of sand if you're going to use sand.
Thanks, Rit. That was really helpful to clarify. So a question from Sebastian Scott, actually, on to Fortenza Duo, which is a seed treatment, and it's systemic, and it's been quite widely promoted by seed companies. There's other quite drastic discussions around genetic engineering of crops to deal with fall armyworm. Maybe you could just speak a little bit about those options and some of the issues with Fortenza Duo in a seed treatment.
So the problem with seed treatments in the context of integrated pest management is that you have to make the intervention before you know whether you've got a problem. So it's really because you have to pay for this expensive seed treatment. And it's, as I showed in my data, most farmers don't have a problem with fall armyworm most of the time. These are smallholder farmers who have diverse plots. So, you know, it would be very poor advice to be telling them that they should be using such seed treatment because they're just wasting money. The other problem with seed treatments is there's this assumption that it doesn't have a negative impact on the field because it's systemic. But this is actually very, very wrong. There's now quite a lot of research, particularly on neonicotinoids in Europe, which are also a systemic seed treatment. And it has a very, very significant effect on the soil fauna and so forth. So it is actually poisoning your soils. So I'm not with Fortosa, I'm not so sure of its actual negative impacts, but it is definitely a wrong assumption to think that it's okay for the soil organisms. There's a lot of good research coming out that these are actually have quite significant impacts on introducing a toxin to the soil, which then damages the soil. So my advice there would be, well, first of all, you only want to use these where you really have a very significant problem, like year in, year out, because you're making the investment before you know whether you have a problem. And the second thing is that you want to be very careful that you've read about the research to know whether or not it's actually having a very negative impact on your soil. In fact, neonicotinoids are now being banned in Europe for this reason. So.
Well, that says it all then. So thank you very much, Red. So there's only 5 minutes left. So I want to just ask you 2 questions. Is one about, does fall armyworm, would it attack indigenous seeds just as much as it would attack hybrid seeds, in particularly looking at maize? And then the other thing is, a lot of these options are really, really good and helpful for smallholder farmers, all about the integrated pest management. But what about large fields, particularly of maize, monocropping, when people are trying to do a cash crop, larger size, large scale farmers, commercial farmers, some of the options for them? Thanks, Red. If you could just answer those 2.
So in answer to the first question on the effects of varieties, so different varieties do have different, some are more pest resistant to others. And in fact, CIMMYT has been, which is the maize breeding center based in Nairobi. Well, it's based in Latin America, but they have a big program out of Nairobi. They have actually bred fall armyworm resistant varieties and fall armyworm tolerant varieties. Those are 2 different properties. A tolerant variety is one that can get attacked and then recovers. A resistant variety prevents attack. So they've been breeding these. Again, I think it all comes down to the difference in yield. To be honest, I would be advising farmers at the moment to use the variety that they think gives them the best yield, because the impact of fall armyworm on yield is very limited. So if you're going to use a variety that is very resistant but has lower yield, you're probably going to end up worse off than you would if you just used a higher yielding variety. So that's the calculation you need to make. So again, it depends on, if you're in an area where you're year in, year out, you're being very heavily attacked by fall armyworm, then it may benefit to use a more resistant or a more tolerant variety. But I would think for most farmers in most places, this is not, it's not worth worrying about whether it's sensitive to fall armyworm or not. Sorry, in your second question?
Some of the options that you've said, we're really looking at smaller holder farms, and Janet was also talking about them. We can use a lot of different integrated solutions. What about large scale farms? cash
So-
crop monocultures?
Yeah, I mean, cash crop monoculture type production is kind of the worst thing for pest control, because it's just, like I said, it's like saying giving a huge dinner plate to your pests. It's really reducing the biodiversity of the field. There's an awful lot of research shows that you get larger numbers of natural enemies, and therefore lower numbers of pests closer to field margins, things like that. So when you have a vast area under one crop, you're really sort of making it difficult for yourself. But still come back to the basics. If the soil management is done well, then your soil will be much healthier and much more resistant to pests. So that's the first thing. Even on a very large field, if you have really good soil management, you'll probably have a fairly trivial pest problem. The other thing is that you can do other types of intervention, such as intercropping within a large field. It's just how you manage that around the mechanization that you're going to use. But if, for example, if you've got mechanical harvesters and the boom is so far apart, then you have to plant your intercrop row so that it goes between the rows that the harvester would be taking. So you just have to plan the field around your equipment that you're going to use. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. You can still have intercropping in a mechanically harvested field. You just have to make sure that the spacing is correct for the equipment you're using. So, and in fact, in the United States, a significant amount of maize is produced, is minimum tillage maize. So it's not that these types of interventions are not being practiced by commercial farmers. Obviously, it's not as common among commercial farmers, but there are commercial farmers out there who are managing their fields using these kinds of interventions. And in fact, there's an organic farm near us here, KHSA, which has it's a commercial scale organic farm, and I know I've been up there several times. They get hardly any problem from fall armyworm, and it's all down to the fact that their soil is very, very healthy. So even though they've got 50 hectare fields, they're with a central pivot system, they're doing just fine.
Thank you so much. That just said it all, wasn't it? Is it a monoculture that goes against everything? It's just a banquet for pests and diseases. So go diversified agroecological farming. So Rhett, thank you so much. We've run out of time. I want to ask you to say one last word, and Janet, I'm then going to ask you to say one last, anything that you have to add. So Rhett, thank you. There's a lot of questions that are still in the chat box. If you can answer any of those, but I think we will also direct them we'll look at them over email and put this all into a report. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I wish that we had a lot longer. Rhett, is there anything that you want to add to finish off?
I mean, I think that the main thing is that people should really not panic when they have a pest in the field. It's part of the ecology of the field that you will have pests and disease in your field, and in most cases they don't cause a lot of damage, but it is critical to be tracking them, to be scouting, so that you are aware of what the situation is and be informed about what are the types of interventions you can take if the pest starts to get to levels that are going to have a negative impact on your harvest. Almost every field I go to has fall armyworm in it, but most fields, the numbers of fall armyworm are so few, or they don't develop into the late stage larvae, that they're just really not doing a lot of damage. They're all there, they're always there, but they're not doing a lot of damage. They're nothing to worry about.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you. Thank you, Professor. Janet, do you have one last word that you would like to add to? I'm really sorry we couldn't come back to you and have some more questions for you as well.
No problem. Thank you so much, Francis. I tried at the meantime to respond to the questions that were on the Q&A box. But basically, for me, it's just emphasizing the need to really work on having healthy plants, which are strong and able to withstand any pest or disease attack. So really having a good ecosystem at the farm, and this will make sure and will help us to not have to start managing pests or diseases. So we really should work on having healthy plants with all the nutrition they need as a basis. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And at the end of the day, our healthy soil, our healthy plants is going to be a healthy us and our children. And so just thank you both, our speakers. Thank you everyone for joining us. You know, this really is, the whole world is waking up to the need to transition to agroecology and poison-free food. So this is the start of it, and the people in this room. So thank you so much. It's been a fascinating presentation. Don't forget to join us next week. We're going to be looking at appropriate technologies for smallholder farmers, both in field, and let's think about landscapes. We live in a much bigger environment. And so what does that mean for farmers, not just on the field within, but the whole farm system? And there's a lot of great technologies that exist. And then the next week after that is getting off the poison train and converting to agroecology and organics, which we'll be talking about. So thank you all so much. We will send the report around. We're going to just show a short video as we close, but feel free to leave when you would like to. Rhett and Janet, thank you again. Bye, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure, and I wish you all a nice afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Janet.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rhett.